Let's go back in time to a quiet little community that found itself caught in the middle of an unseen war. This is a story about resilience, about control, and really what it means to call a place home when your whole world is about to be turned upside down. This is the story of Sg Pelek. So let's set the scene. The year is 1951, and we're in a place called Sg Pelek, in what was then British Malaya. Now, the Second World War might be over, but for the folks living here, peace, well, that felt like a very distant idea. The jungle, which was always a source of life, had suddenly become a place of incredible danger. And this quote, it just perfectly captures the feeling of the time. The enemy was unseen, unnamed, and everywhere. You see, this wasn't a war with clear battle lines or uniforms. For the families of Sg Pelek, the threat was this constant, invisible presence that wove a deep sense of fear into their everyday lives. So what was life actually like before everything changed? Let's take a look at the world these families knew. It was a life lived in this sort of delicate balance, squeezed between the dense jungle on one side and the winding river on the other. And to really understand this piece of history, you have to get to know the people. We're talking about families like the Wongs, who lived right on the edge of the jungle, or the Engs, who had their rubber trees growing down by the river. And what's so important to remember is this. They weren't rebels. They weren't soldiers. They were just families, doing whatever they could to survive. Their entire world was pretty much built right from the land itself. Their homes were made of wood and atop palm leaves. The water they used came straight from the river. And at night, their only light came from little oil lamps. It was a simple, really self-sufficient life, totally connected to the rhythms of nature all around them. Now, this is where you start to see the impossible situation they were in. The villagers were completely caught in the middle. One day, strangers with guns might walk out of the jungle asking for food. And then, not long after, soldiers would show up asking questions. If you said too little, you were a suspect. But if you said too much, you could become a target. It was this terrifying tightrope they had to walk every single day. And then, the moment came that changed absolutely everything. One morning, British soldiers and local police showed up. But this time, they didn't have questions. They had an order that was about to uproot these families and completely reshape their entire existence. They were told they were being moved into what was officially called a new village. And let's be clear, this wasn't a choice. It was a compulsory resettlement. The official line was that it was for their security and protection. But the real goal? It was control. The idea was to completely cut off the rural communities from any insurgents that might be hiding out in the jungle. I mean, the heartbreak of that moment is just captured in this one simple sentence. Can you imagine having just a few hours to decide which pieces of your life you can carry on your back? The source material talks about families frantically digging up their vegetables, trying to mark ancestral graves so they wouldn't be lost, and just leaving behind the homes they had built with their own two hands. And this was their new reality. Life was no longer defined by the jungle and the river. From now on, it was defined by a perimeter of barbed wire. This fenced-in space, with its gates and its guards, was their new home. The change in their lives was just absolute. Look at this comparison. Freedom to roam? Gone. Replaced by gates and guards. Working on your own time? Nope. Now it was only during permitted hours. A life living with nature became a life living under constant inspection. Their autonomy had just vanished. So a new daily ritual began. Every single morning, just to get to their own rubber trees, everyone, the Wongs, the Nings, the Tans, the Lees, they all had to line up at the gate for inspection. Baskets were checked, tools were checked, names were called out from a list. It was a constant daily reminder that they were living under watch. So, how do you adapt to a life like that? This next part is all about survival. It's about how these families found a way to just keep going, to endure, and to somehow hold on to who they were in this new world of silence and fear. Even when they were allowed outside the fence to work, the danger was still there. Their rubber trees were still out in that jungle they once called home. But now, the fear was just amplified. Every snapped twig made their hearts race. Every unfamiliar sound could mean danger. And then, when the gates were locked at dusk, a whole different kind of life began. A quiet, inward-looking one. Families would eat together, but fear was kind of an unspoken guest at the dinner table. And yet,
traditions found a way to survive. Festivals were observed, but discreetly. The names of their ancestors were still spoken. Culture was being preserved, but in whispers. Eventually, the Milan emergency did end. So what's the legacy of this whole period? What's left of this experience in the Sg Pelek of today?
Okay, so here's the really crucial point. The physical things, the wire fences, the gates, they were all taken down, but the structure they created, the new village itself, that became permanent. What started as a temporary military strategy actually became the blueprint for the town's entire future.
And the physical transformation of the village is pretty striking. Those temporary wooden houses became permanent concrete homes. The old dirt paths were paved over. A community that was once defined by fear and discipline now has shops and schools. But through all of that change, the river, that silent witness to all this history, it just keeps flowing on, unchanged.
And that really brings us to the heart of it all. While we followed the stories of the Wangs and the Nings, their experience was anything but unique. This is the collective story of an entire generation who lived through this time. It's a shared memory of resilience, forged in that space between the jungle and the wire fence.
And so, this leaves us with a really important question to think about. When stories like this one begin to fade, what is it that we really lose? When we forget the quiet endurance and the silent struggles of the people who came before us, what essential part of ourselves do we lose right along with them?